Hi, I'm Julie with the Halter Project, and we're here to talk about early evacuation. If you've been following along, you know that we emphasize the importance of early planning, knowing far in advance where you're going to go, how you're going to get there, and since our audience are the animal owners, those of you with pets, equines, livestock, backyard farm animals, leaving early and lots of advanced planning and knowing who is going to help you when you need it are all really critical parts of the equation. So this afternoon, I want to talk about early evacuation. What does that really mean, and how do you go about planning for those things that might never happen, but in case they do, you want to be absolutely certain you're ready. So early evacuation, for the purposes of this conversation, is evacuating before you receive an evacuation order, or what's commonly considered a mandatory evacuation from your emergency managers. So earlier in our discussion of evacuation planning, we talked about the types of alerts that you can get and the stages of evacuation. So knowing far in advance when a weather incident is likely to lead to, say, a fire or a hurricane or perhaps a tornado or other type of severe storm. We usually have planning forecasts pretty far out that allow emergency managers and us to plan ahead of when we're going to need to move. We don't always have early mornings, but when we do, you need to make sure that you've got everything lined up. You know exactly who you're going to call on, where you're going to go, and how you're going to get there. Or if your animals are going to be sheltering in place at home, which is often a very good option, that you have everything set up so that your animals will be safe and responders can get in to care for them later in the disaster if they're still not allowing owners to come back into their homes. So these are all really important things. They all make the difference between surviving in style, safely and healthfully, or risking tragedy. So I'm going to start with identifying resources. Early evacuation means that you have all of the information you need at your fingertips far in advance of when you're going to need it. So right now, it's a summer afternoon in Sonoma County, California. We have a nice, lull, gorgeous, cool afternoon, but we're in between two critical fire danger periods. We went through much of last week under a red flag and critical to extreme high fire danger. We had small fires popping up all over Northern California. Right now we're in a little bit of a lull, but the forecasters are telling us we're headed into another cycle. And those will become more frequent as summer progresses, as the landscape dries out more, and we have more hot weather. Those of you who live in tornado country or in the hurricane belt, you're in a similar type of planning phase. You have gorgeous weather in between those bouts of severe thunderstorms and tropical depressions that can spawn other types of more serious storms. Now, when we're looking at weather forecasts for an extreme weather event or fire event, we hope for as much time as possible to make our plans. And most of the time we get that. But you still can't count on that. And you need to have a shelter-in-place plan that's as solid as your early evacuation plans. It's a little bit confusing, but we always talk about your shelter-in-place planning in the context of evacuation planning. Many of the things that you do to make your home safe and defensible from fire, flooding, or a storm are going to be the very things that make it as safe as possible, the safest possible place for your animals to shelter. When you're planning for early evacuation or making those decisions about whether to evacuate or shelter in place, you need to assess the risks involved with each. And of course, in an event where you have no advance warning, you have no option of evacuation. You will be sheltering in place. So again, it's really important to make sure that those shelter in place plans are as airtight as your evacuation plans. Going to a shelter might not necessarily be the absolute best thing for your animals. Shelters can be crowded and stressful. They can lead to health problems such as chronic digestive issues or infectious disease spread from other animals. So regardless of how well run and how diligent the staffing of the emergency shelter is, animals, just like people, run an increasingly high risk of getting something if that's where you and they end up. So you might think of heading to an emergency shelter as part of your early evacuation plan as a temporary way station. Hopefully you won't have to stay there, or your animals won't have to stay there for very long. The ideal is to completely avoid ending up in an emergency shelter, whether it's a human shelter or the animal shelter. So how to do that? Start lining up all of your resources way, way, way in advance. What kinds of resources do you need to be thinking of? Well, number one, where to go, where to take your animals. So that could include pet-friendly motels, VRBOs, houses of friends and relatives, boarding facility, people who have pasture. How do you find out about those? Well, get to know people in your community who run animal rescue organizations, horse show and rodeo groups, trail riding organizations, some of the sanctuary organizations. Maybe you're a volunteer in a nonprofit pet shelter. Start networking with people to find out who might have what you need. Let's talk a little bit more about the kinds of resources who might be really useful to you in an early evacuation scenario. Early evacuation means that there are no orders in place. You can go wherever you want. Authorities may be advising that one route is better than another, but basically the emergency or disaster hasn't hit your area yet. That's the time to go because you'll avoid traffic. If they're opening emergency shelters, chances are those shelters won't be filled yet. You'll have a lot more options. So how do you find the helpers to help you move your animals, find places for them to stay? Well, we talked about some of the basics like pet-friendly VRBOs, commercial transportation companies, shelter organizations, animal rescue nonprofits. There is another category of helper that is available in voluntary, pre-mandatory early evacuation situations that can be enormously helpful, but you do have to be careful. Those are the volunteer Facebook groups that are popping up everywhere. So most of these are fantastic resources. There are people with good equipment, trucks, trailers, lots and lots of animal handling experience, and they truly want to help. These can be great resources for early evacuation transportation and also for networking, places where you can board your animals. Lots of times ranchers will say, hey, I've got a pasture. I can take someone with 3 or 4 horses and some goats, and I'm happy to have you bring your dogs, and you can camp out in my backyard, or you can camp out in front of the barn. So knowing how to find those kinds of resources and opportunities is really important. I'm not going to mention any groups in particular, but do some research. Look into what's available in your group. Talk to people who are in those horse clubs or those rodeo associations. Maybe ask your local farm bureau. Sometimes the 4-H or FFA leader might know of some people who fall into that category. But be very, very careful. When you are responding to a post on Facebook for help with animals, make absolutely certain you know who you're talking to. Make sure that your animals have identification. Make sure that you get all of the contact information for the person or people who are picking up your animals. Get the address and the contact for where those animals are going to go. Make sure that you have all of your photo identification and documentation for your animals before you release them. If you are trusting equines, to someone you don't know, it's a good idea to make sure you do not give them your Coggins test paperwork for the obvious reasons. Most of these people are going to be fantastic and could become friends for life. But sadly, as the number of incidents increase in number, so do the number of unscrupulous people. Just as those who take advantage of looting opportunities, we do have some kind of Wild West outlaw, horse thieves, cattle rustlers, people who take advantage of your need for help in an emergency to do something unscrupulous. So be absolutely certain you know who you're giving your animals to, where they're going, and that you have all of the documentation. And follow up. Make sure that the people at the other end, if you're not able to accompany them, contact you and give you proof with photographs that your animals are where they told you they would be. But moving away from that, these Facebook groups can usually be super sources of not just assistance, but also networking information. The key here is to, again, know before you go. Don't wait till the last minute so that you have to rely on somebody you don't know, have never talked to, and know nothing about. Locate and identify these resources weeks or months before you might need them. Meet them face to face if possible. Establish a relationship. Know who your resources are. Know who's going to be helping you. Know who is going to care for your animals. If they have an opportunity to meet your animals, maybe practice loading them, if you can see where they're going to go, maybe you can even take a load of their feed and their supplies to that location just as an emergency backup. That's going to be a perfect world scenario. It may not always happen, but what we want to do is encourage you to be ready to move early, make sure you can do it safely, and if you can't leave or decide that your animals are safer at home, then concentrate on making their home place the absolute safest place to be. If it's transportation that you're looking for, that's going to be more challenging, and you need to make sure that you have enough safe and reliable transportation for all your animals if your plan is always going to be to evacuate them. So if you own horses or mules or livestock, backyard farm animals, and you don't have a trailer, or you have a trailer that can't contain all your animals in one trip, then you need to be looking for people who can come and help you. How do you find those people? Well, again, talk to local animal groups, the horse show and rodeo associations, contact professional equine and livestock haulers. And even if they may not be able to take on new clients, they can usually refer you to other people, usually volunteers, but with good, safe equipment and who are also very knowledgeable, who can help you out with the transportation. Those are often really good resources for temporary pasture, pens, and paddocks. Lots of people in communities might have one stall or a small pasture or a pen that they want to make available to people in emergencies, and that might be a perfect fit for you. But lesson number 2, don't ever fall into the trap of having just one emergency resource for boarding or one emergency resource for transportation, because those resources may not be available when you need them. So a critical rule of thumb is have more than one of everything. If you've been following this series, you know that we emphasize the vast importance of having multiple disaster action plans. Have more than one evacuation route, more than one safe sheltering place at your home or in your neighborhood or on your ranch. Have more than one resource for everything. Think about every possible thing that could go wrong. Yep, it's a little anxiety causing, but when you need it, having that planning in your pocket is going to be the best thing you could do for yourself. And you'll pat yourself on the back later for having it. So have multiples of everything you're going to need, line them up far in advance, and make sure that you know how to get in touch with them. So have them all in your contacts in your phone, have a notebook or an old-fashioned address book with everybody's names and contact information, and make sure you include that information in your disaster action plan or emergency action plan. And again, we've discussed your DAPs in another segment in this series. So that could be your binder, it could be a grab and go file. You definitely want to have it backed up, and you may want to have a copy that you keep with you and another one that you give to somebody who might be caring for your animals in an emergency. But the takeaway here is have multiple resources for where to go, multiple routes for how to get there, and multiple means of transporting them if you yourself aren't going to be able to. And have all of that contact information handy where you can get to it at a moment's notice. We've talked about early evacuation, what that means, and how to line up your resources. Now, what happens if you've done everything right, but something has happened? You had no advance warning, you weren't home when it happened. For a variety of reasons, you're now in a situation where your animals are at home and you can't get to them, and you want to get help. You want to be able to request help to perhaps evacuate your animals out or care for them and make sure they're okay, they're getting their food, they have enough water. If you have anybody who needs special medications, all of those needs are being cared for. So in this segment, I'm going to help you understand how to request help for your animals during an ongoing disaster. So when I say that to people, usually someone will say, "You can do that? Who are the people who help?" And most people instantly think of those Facebook groups that pop up or you see on the news. Well, certainly there are some Good Samaritan volunteer groups who occasionally are able to do really, really great work and help people and animals in disasters. But most of the time, when the disaster is in full swing, our emergency managers are going to be extremely strict about who they allow in, for a whole bunch of different reasons. So what we're going to be focusing on in this discussion are the safe, authorized, responsible responders who are going to be working in partnerships with the government agencies and incident commanders. So how do you ask for help? In an earlier session, we talked about all the different ways you can get alerts. So you've done that, you're getting information on your cell phone, maybe you got a call on your landline, you've got your car radio tuned into the local news stations, but you're not at home, you're not where your animals are. If you're listening to all of that information and you're getting alerts on your phone via text message, or you're able to follow some of the agencies through their apps or on social media, you will know where the emergency shelters are, and you will also be able to find out what numbers you can call or where you can go to request help for your animals who are at home. So generally, that information is going to be posted in all of the updates that you're getting through your local Office of Emergency Services. They will be posting the evacuation routes. They will be providing the information about the emergency animal shelters for pets and large animals. They may also even include information about what animals go where. Some large animal shelters will be the place you take poultry. In some counties or states, we can't evacuate poultry anywhere because of epidemic quarantines. So it's really critical that you know that information and you know how to get it. So where you will find it is in the emergency posts. If we're talking about California and fire season, we have a variety of resources who will be posting that information. CAL FIRE is a great source. Our county offices of emergency services, our local sheriffs, all of these will be pushing out information, and almost all of them will be referring to information provided by the agency responsible for animals. Sometimes the local animal control or animal services agency will be posting its own information. Usually that's going to be folded into the other emergency information that you're seeing, but it will be there. Again, knowing where to go and what platforms to use to find that are going to be really helpful. You can also try Call 211. So Call 211 is a volunteer-run helpline that's provided by United Way throughout the United States. And those 211 call takers are given information straight out of the Emergency Operations Center, usually with the most current updates. Sometimes they have information for animals, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't have it in the very beginning of the disaster, but they may have it after a few hours or after a day. So again, don't rely on just one way to get information. Make sure you understand all of the different options and that you're able to access at least one or two. One thing you shouldn't do is rely on information from unreliable or unauthorized sources. Your local next door group may be great during the week, and it might be a perfect place to find out where to get a haircut or a good dog walker, but it is not necessarily going to be a reliable source of information in a disaster. So stick with trusted, reliable channels. Stay with the official agency platforms, ways to get information. So your animals are at home, you have safely evacuated to somewhere else, and you want to ask for help for them. So if you would like your animals to be evacuated, you can make a request for that. If you want someone to check on your animals and perhaps feed them, make sure they have water, make sure that they're getting their medications, if somebody has special needs, that's called a request for a welfare check, and those are available. Who provides evacuation or welfare checks during an ongoing disaster behind roadblocks in mandatory evacuation areas? Well, those are resources who are mutual aid partners working with the County Office of Emergency Services and the incident management. And in most places, those resources are community animal response teams or a bigger federal resource called an animal search and rescue team. So those are basically versions of your local volunteer sheriff search and rescue, but with very specialized skills and resources to help animals. And that's all they do. They are going to be the resources who are working with the firefighters and law enforcement and the local shelter agencies to look for your animals, care for your animals in place, if necessary, remove your animals and evacuate them to a safe place. Get them veterinary care, whether that means taking a vet into your property or bringing your animals out and taking them to an emergency veterinary clinic or shelter location. So these are groups that are composed of highly trained volunteers who train, plan, and prepare year-round to be available on their own dime as registered authorized resources to their county. In larger incidents, counties may call on national or international animal disaster response teams. Some of these are provided by groups like the ASPCA or the Humane Society of the United States or IFAW, the International Fund for Animal Welfare. Some mutual aid is often provided by local groups, county to county or region to region. Most animal control agencies and incident managers have these relationships planned far in advance. But as an incident gets bigger, they may need more and more resources. As the local resources become fatigued, just as the fire service starts requesting help from neighboring agencies, other states, and sometimes even other countries, our animal control resources will do the same. As the local responders start to be stretched thin, maybe many of them are actually in an evac situation or even perhaps not able to get to where they need to respond. As an incident gets longer and people become tired and need breaks, we are very fortunate. We have wonderful resources throughout the country and sometimes other countries who will come and provide backup to the local resources when they can no longer do everything they need to do. So, just to circle back, know in advance. Part of your early evacuation planning and part of your disaster action plan means know how to request help for animals in a disaster, have those numbers and contacts handy, know how to get the emergency information, and make sure that you have it at your fingertips. We have lots and lots of information, tips, and tools about creating a safe situation for your animals sheltered in place on our website, halterproject.org.